This is Designing Security Products, where we talk about the intersection of product design and cybersecurity products. I'm William Donnell, lead design scientist at Sodium Halogen, which is a totally made up title and name. And today I am fortunate to be talking with longtime friend David Dickerson, who is also works at Sodium Halogen. He is the senior product designer here. He's a senior product designer. So, David, long time since we've chatted a couple hours ago, but
Yep.
thanks for talking with me today. You've got so much knowledge and expertise. I was like, I'm talking with all of these other people. I should talk with some of our own team as well. So thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. So let's start by just telling me a little bit about your background in design, and then let's just start with that.
Background is I basically started as a hobby. I've been doing design for probably about 25 years. Late teens, got into making websites, doing some graphic designs like album covers and terrible websites, MySpace pages, things like that. Somewhere along the way, ran into kind of the web standards crowd, like Jeffrey Zeldman and so on. That kind of put me on some good habits, fortunately, but primarily was just doing web design as a hobby. Ended up getting my first job doing it for my church, actually. And then they ended up kind of hiring me eventually full time. And I just handled everything. So all brochures and videos and websites and everything like that. So it's kind of a jack of all trades thing. Never actually went to school for that kind of design, but you know, I'm a kind of DIY sort of person and I read a whole lot.
Yeah.
Eventually, as you know, like I ended up not working for that church anymore and was looking for folks to work with. I reached out to you actually. I think that was 2007.
Probably.
Yeah. So we did a lot of website design together for several years. So it was primarily web design and then eventually started a lot more into the UX design space and then migrating into more complex products and applications. So that's kind of where I've made my home over the past several years. I was senior product designer with a real estate tech company for a while and then came back and started working with you, my good buddy William.
Yeah. So one of the questions I always ask is, how did you get into security product design?
Well, I didn't really do any security products until I came back and started working with you again a few years ago. So we were doing some pretty complex products. It was real estate data and analytics and so on. But yeah, I think the first security products I really started handling were with the sodium halogen team. So
Yeah.
a pretty big learning curve initially. Yeah.
Yeah. How was that?
A lot of the fundamentals are, of course, the same, especially when it comes to like UX design and how you approach it. I like to think pretty deeply in systems, so that all seemed to be fine. The more bigger learning curve was probably just the amount of technicality that goes along with the cybersecurity space. Like almost everybody who's any sort of expert in there that you're working with is more along the lines of an engineer, right? And boy, there's a lot of jargon. So I have my own personal cybersecurity glossary that I keep updated, all the new terms that come in from all the different projects we do, and just trying to read up on things. And honestly, I find that the most helpful thing that I try to do is not pretend like I actually know something. So, I think I used to be worried about that. Like if you're working with a client and you're specializing in cybersecurity and they're talking about something that you don't quite understand, I just started saying, yeah, can you explain that better? I don't quite get that concept. And everybody's been totally happy to do so. And that hasn't harmed any relationships and really has just helped me learn better. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's that has been my experience too in the security world, just as a whole, honestly. Like you can ask a question about some technical thing and say, "Hey, I'm not familiar with that acronym," or I don't understand exactly how this works. Can you explain it?" And rather than, I mean, your knee jerk reaction is you're afraid they're going to go, "How do you not know this stuff?" But instead, every time it's been like, "Yeah, yeah, let me explain it because it is kind of complex," and then they kind of unpack it, and then you get so much more insight from that than if you just kind of
right.
assumed that you knew, and then now you're
Yeah.
working off of assumptions rather than getting a fresh take on on this person who is legitimately an expert, right? So you get to
Right.
benefit from that expertise that just got knowledge dropped on you.
Yeah, and it's not like we don't know anything, right? And I've actually found that we end up, kind of coming from a little bit outside of, I mean, every product's different, right? And the angle that they're taking is usually got some unique twist to it. So there's always going to be some sort of learning curve, no matter if you're doing cybersecurity or fintech products or anything like that. So asking lots of questions is always going to be important, of course. But I think just being humble about what you don't know is is good. I think we actually do a pretty good job of challenging as well. So
Mm.
if something seems overly complex, for example, then I don't just go, "Oh, okay, I probably just can't get this thing." I'll actually go, "Hey, how might we make that actually easier to understand?" Or even I know with a recent client, even thinking of the data models that were already kind of structured in the application, there was quite a bit of reworking that we did, and all that was great. I think we try to be strategic partners, right? So I'm always trying to approach this with the ability to learn it and not just assuming I know what the client needs, what they want, but also, I mean, we've got a lot of experience with best practices and the UX techniques and so on. So that's always informing the way we look at things.
How important do you think it is to talk with customers very early in the design process or in the product process?
I think the earlier the better, and the more continual the better. It's not always able to be done, but that would be ideal.
How do you
Yeah.
balance getting things done and taking the time to research and make sure the thing we're getting done is actually what should be done?
I think the approach to it's going to have to be different depending on what stage you're at. So it's probably trying to be ruthless about, and we're not always ruthless about this, or I'm not, but what is the fastest and most efficient way I can get to the answer that I need at this moment? And those needs are always changing throughout the whole life cycle of a product or a project. So, initially, if you're trying to figure out, hey, there's this pain point we see, and I have this idea on how we could solve it, it's like the early shaping of the idea. That's probably one of the most critical times to get as much feedback as possible. I think we see a lot. I think there's been a shift away from this, but it seemed like there was a a good several years where kind of the common approach to building any product was bringing an idea, building the idea, and really struggling to find the market fit for it, and you're kind of coming in with a pretty strong opinionated idea of how this thing is going to work. One counter idea to that I've always liked was Amy Hoy's approach, where she would just suggest doing what she called a sales safari. You would go, and instead of kind of going, "This is the thing that I want to build," you would say, "These are the people that I want to serve. I can see some pain points that I already have an idea for, but let's go find these people. Let's have conversations with them. Let's find out what are the things that they think are their pains." And often it'll evolve your own idea before you ever even start building it, right? So I think that's probably pretty critical. But you often get some pushback to that, kind of the Henry Ford concept of, if Henry Ford had asked what his users wanted, right? Then we would have had, better horses. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's the right course. The faster horses, that's what it was.
faster horse. But the other thing is that I always think about is, okay, sure, but if that is the question that Henry Ford was asking, he's asking the wrong question, right? The question is not, do you want a faster horse? It's you talk with him and say, hey, talk to me about your horse. What are the things that are great? Oh, well, I have this animal that I have a little bit of a relationship with, and my daughter loves to come and pet its nose, and but it gets sick, and sometimes and it's really expensive to feed it all the time, and I have to build a barn to put it in, and I have to get hay and all this stuff, and it still takes a long time to get into town. So if you break it back to what is the problem the horse solves for the user, then you can start saying, okay, what are other ways we can solve this problem? And then what could arise from that is, what if we had a way to get into town that could haul more, that didn't get sick as often, that was more reliable, would carry more people than just one person? Then you might look at something that's more like a car or a truck or something, right? So I think that anytime somebody uses that analogy, that I'm just like, well, isn't that asking the wrong question? No.
Right.
You don't ask people what they
Yeah.
want. You say, what is the problem you want to get solved? And then how do you do it today? And what's awesome about the way you do it today? What's terrible about the way you do it today?
Yeah. I do think there's a good use case to be made for solving your own problem, right? Kind of being your own user, right? And then obviously the innovation side. There are obviously products and ideas and advancements that are being made that a lot of people don't even have on their radar at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that some of those things are kind of the resulting of digging in and asking questions and what ifs and looking for opportunities and so on. So, I don't think that talking to your potential customers or the people that you really want to interface with is ever a bad thing to do. I don't think it's going to be a damaging thing to do.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's you're mining for gold. You know,
Hmm.
like there is so much knowledge about what you should build and how you should solve this problem for them and where you should put your emphasis and where you should not be distracted. And the only place I know of to find that information is inside the head of the people that you're trying to sell this application to, right? And so if you don't talk to
Right.
them and your engineering team is making all of the decisions or your executive team is making all the decisions on what this product is or what it's not, I mean, I think Steve Jobs is probably famous for being someone who is thought to be this lone genius, but I'm sure there was a good bit of research that was done. And also, there's only been one Steve Jobs, you know. So
Mhm.
let's just say that this really was just his genius of kind of understanding what people wanting and having this vision and making it happen. Let's say that that's true, just for argument's sake. Who's the other one that does that? I mean, does that sound like a repeatable thing that you can do? I don't feel
Right.
like I can do
Yeah.
that, right? So
Not
the only
everybody
way
is
I know
Steve
how to do
Jobs.
it, yeah, the only way I know how to do it is to rather than the Steve Jobs approach, I'm going to have to figure it out by talking with customers and taking this road instead. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and that's fine. If you're a Steve Jobs, amazing. Get at it, you know? Um, but having good repeatable processes, a good foundation that's reduces a lot of risk, that increases the likelihood of success, just a good thing to kind of go, this should be the default, right?
yeah, yeah. I want to shift gears here a little bit because I know you and I have had some conversations about the incorporation of AI. You know, a recent product we've been working on was at the intersection of cybersecurity and AI. And so it had agentic AI in it, and we had to figure out what are the best ways for users to be able to interact with AI. Tell me a little bit about the process of how you dealt with incorporating AI in an effective way into a security product.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of products that once Chat GPT took off, and over the past couple of years, we've just seen almost everything adopt AI. And there have been some noticeable standout products in the midst of all that. But there's been a lot of products, I would say, that just seem to kind of get caught up in the wave. And they're like, if we don't do this, then we're going to be obsolete. So they kind of slap a chat agent on top or something like that, right? So I think fundamentally, the first approach is, what is it bringing to the table? What's the value that it's bringing? And really kind of tightly focusing in on how it should bring that value. I think the chat interface is, yeah, at least for now, here to stay for sure. But honestly, that chat interface can be pretty cumbersome and an awkward thing to deal with sometimes. And if you think of, probably because it's just so open-ended, and so when you have an application that is pretty focused on, let's say, some core workflows, you can't just slap a chat interface on there and expect people to know exactly what to do. It creates a lot of edge cases, a lot. And it's like, do we want things to be open? What are the guardrails that you're putting up, right? So on a recent product, for example, it's entirely agentic, but it's not just open-ended. It's not like working with ChatGPT, That's not the point of the application. It's made for a very specific use case, and it's using AI agents to solve that use case very well. And then it needs to be able to give some additional ability to the users. But that was kind of the challenge, was how do we open that power up to the user without letting them just get into this, not knowing what to do next, or it just being an open playing field where they could break it over and over and over. So we actually moved away from the chat interface, at least for the initial versions, right? And then that, of course, brought in its own challenges of how do you kind of integrate something into a UI and create an understanding, like, your users are always learning how to use your application. And if down the road, we're like, at some point, we are going to need a chat interface, or we need to open this up to be a lot more broad. That's a kind of unique challenge. Like if you only have, let's say, three options you want them to be able to do, there's no chat interface, there's just suggested actions to do. So that's kind of how we approached it. We sort of did a hybrid, because at first we were not actually, I think, clearly communicating that it was an AI agent actually doing the work. And there was a couple problems with that. Number one was trust. Um, I think people need to know what AI is actually doing, and you need to have the transparency around that, the sources, and the ability for them to kind of validate what's going on. But even beyond the trust aspect, it seemed very, there was kind of a selling point that we have to acknowledge with AI. Like it brings an expectation of power, right? And when you're kind of hiding that, it was doing the same thing, whether we hit it or not. But we found that by, in conversations with people, this is a good use case for this. We had this assumption like we could strip away all the chat agent kind of a thing and just kind of hide the entire AI interface, and instead just smartly suggest the next actions that needed to be done in this particular workflow, right? And so it kind of felt more like a wizard, let's say. Um, and that did not have the same impact that actually putting it in almost like a pseudo chat agent that they couldn't type into, but it was still kind of conversational looking, and it just gave you suggested actions next. It actually felt like you were interacting with an agent in the same way that, very similar to a chat interface, and it kind of captured that feeling. So that was kind of an oddity. That was actually something I think you had asked me earlier before the call of, what are some of the things that you've been wrong about, right? That would have been one of the things I was wrong about. I was like, this is probably a good way to do it so we don't deal with all the chat thing. No, it was actually more confusing for people, and it didn't seem to represent the power of the tool better. So we did something different.
As people who are doing the research and the product design for security products and any product, honestly, there's always this healthy tension that needs to be there of figuring out this, what is the next feature that is going to provide value for our customer, and how can we design it in a way that is helpful for them. But then you can't get caught up in just being a feature farm without doing some of the high level big picture stuff, like, hey, this is where we want to be in 6 months, this is where we want to be in a year. So how do you balance those things?
I think it has to be done in cyclical stages. Like I think you should always be leading with strategy. So the strategic research, trying to understand and cast a vision for where you're going and what you are wanting to build is pretty critical right off the get-go. I think that's pretty obvious. But all of those things translate then into tickets. Ultimately, all of your strategy has got to come down to, okay, how are we going to actually build this thing? And then it gets into the features, right? And so you're moving from a high level strategic side down into more tactical things. But I find that tends to kind of go in sprints, of some length. We tend to have relatively long relationships with clients, where we're typically doing like not just a version one for a product, but often moving into new versions of it as well. So, and the thing I've always found is like you always starting off strategic, high level, and then you're starting to add in the more granular and tactical type of research. I just don't think you should ever quit the strategic, because I think the tactical stuff tends to bring a lot of learning as well, obviously, but that's not just limited to the individual features. It affects everything. So usually let's say if you kind of do a whole lot of strategic research, you're doing kind of the plan for the product, and you're like, okay, you chart out, this is going to be our MVP release or our version one release. I guarantee by the time you get to the end of that, there's going to be things that have evolved. and change. And if you haven't done some additional rounds of big level vision casting, you probably need to back up and do that again. I mean, we're working on a product right now that we're kind of in that stage, right? Where version one's done. We're still iterating on features, new things, but we've learned so much, and the landscape even has changed and what they're responding to in the market's changed, right? So we're trying to organize another workshop, to where we can take a big step back and do another big high level thing that's going to inform the next round of things. So I think you should be always doing both. I think the strategic side probably maybe not as frequently, but that's my own take. But there are often sometimes different teams doing those things too. So
Yeah, very cool. All right, last question. So we work with a lot of early stage security product teams, and I'm curious, what is one thing you wish early stage security teams knew about product design?
probably that the best product designer they're going to have is someone who's not going to be content with being an order taker, but instead think of themselves as a strategic partner and really try to fill that role, who cares a lot about their success, and so much so they're going to bring their opinion and expertise to bear. They're going to push back and challenge assumptions and lead with an opinion. I think an opinionated product designer is a good one, as long as they can hold that opinion kind of lightly.